I booked the motel because it was cheap, close to the highway, and I was too tired to keep driving. The clerk barely looked up as he slid the worn plastic key across the counter. "Room 6B, he mumbled, like he'd said it 1,000 times. The hallway leading to my room was dimly lit, with a flickering fluorescent bulb that buzzed faintly. The air smelled like mildew mixed with industrial cleaner, and the carpet squished under my shoes. I hesitated for a moment, but exhaustion won. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Outdated furniture, a sagging mattress, and a faint dampness in the air. I locked the door, double-checked the bolt, and collapsed onto the bed, too tired to care. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound, a voice, low and muffled, like someone whispering in another room. At first, I thought it was coming through the thin walls, but then I realized it was coming from inside the room. My pulse quickened as I sat up in bed. The voice stopped. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, but everything was still. That's when I noticed the closet door, a cheap, sliding one, was slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it earlier. I got up, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. With one trembling hand, I slid the door open all the way. Nothing. Just a few empty hangers swaying slightly on the metal rod as if they'd just been touched. I told myself I was imagining things and crawled back into bed. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I felt it, a weight pressing down at the foot of the mattress. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like someone was sitting there, unmoving. And then the whispering started again, low, urgent, and impossible to understand. I didn't dare move. I couldn't. I stayed like that until the sun came up, too terrified to even close my eyes. When I finally got the courage to leave, I mentioned what had happened to the clerk as I checked out. He gave me a tired, knowing look. "Room 6B?" he said, shaking his head. "You're not the first. People say they hear the guy who died in there. I've told management to shut that room down, but they never listen. Sorry about that." I didn't say anything. I just walked out to my car, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. And as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me go. The motel wasn't anything special. Basic, outdated, but clean enough. After a grueling day, I just wanted sleep. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and checked the window before pulling the curtains tight. I even tested the latch. Clicked firmly into place. Satisfied, I collapsed onto the bed and let the silence swallow me. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound. Something faint. A soft scrape against the floor, like paper being pushed. I stayed still, my ears straining. Then it happened again. Slow, deliberate. My blood ran cold. Someone was sliding something under the door. My chest tightened as I stared at the faint outline of the door. Nothing moved, no shadows. After a few minutes of silence, I finally forced myself to get up, my bare feet hesitant on the carpet. When I reached the door, I saw it, a folded piece of paper lying just inside. With shaking hands, I picked it up. The paper felt cold, almost damp, as if it had been outside for hours. I unfolded it carefully, my pulse thundering in my ears. Scrawled, in jagged handwriting, were the words, "You didn't lock the window." For a moment, the words didn't register. Then my head whipped toward the window. The curtains were still drawn, but something felt wrong. Off. Slowly, I moved closer, my hands trembling as I reached out to pull the fabric aside. The window was closed, but the latch was undone. I stared at it, frozen. I knew I had locked it earlier. I was sure. My shaking fingers pushed the latch back into place, and I yanked the curtains shut so hard they nearly tore. My breathing was shallow, uneven. That's when I saw it. Outside, in the parking lot, a figure stood motionless in the dim glow of the streetlights. They were facing my window, watching. They didn't move. They didn't sway. Just stood there, a shadow against the foggy yellow light. My throat tightened as I ducked down, afraid they might see me. My mind raced. Who were they? How long had they been standing there? And how did they know about the window? I wanted to call the front desk, but my phone was on the nightstand, too far from where I crouched. And the idea of moving through the open space of the room made my skin crawl. I stayed there, pressed against the wall by the window, every muscle in my body, screaming to stay still. Eventually, exhaustion took over. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to sunlight spilling through the curtains. I scrambled to my feet and peeked outside. The parking lot was empty. When I checked out, I couldn't help myself. I told the clerk everything. The note, the unlocked latch, the figure outside. His face went pale as I talked, and he glanced nervously around the lobby. Finally, he leaned in and whispered, "You're lucky. Last week, someone broke into one of the rooms through a window. The guest woke up to find a man standing at the foot of their bed. He just stood there, didn't say a word. When the guest screamed, he bolted. Police never found him." I stood there, stunned, as he handed me my receipt. "If you hadn't locked it again..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't respond. I just left. But as I drove out of the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, like something or someone was still watching me. It was late, well past midnight, and I was desperate to find somewhere to stay. The motel looked like it had seen better days, with peeling paint and a flickering neon vacancy sign. But it was the only option for miles, so I pulled into the lot. The man at the front desk looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken, his voice flat. As he handed me the key to room 209, he said something strange. "Stay in your room. Don't wander the halls at night." I laughed nervously, expecting him to smile back, but his expression didn't change. He just stared at me until I nodded and left. The hallway to my room was unsettlingly quiet. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the air was heavy, almost suffocating. When I reached room 209, I locked the door behind me, tossed my bag onto the chair, and collapsed onto the bed. My body ached from the drive, and I was asleep within minutes. At 1:13 a.m., I remember the exact time, because I checked the glowing red numbers on the clock, I woke up. At first I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it, faint footsteps, echoing down the hallway. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just another guest, but the sound didn't fade. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they stopped. Right outside my door. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then softly, I heard the doorknob jiggle. I froze, my mind racing. The lock held, and after a few agonizing moments, the sound stopped. But I couldn't go back to sleep. Something about the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. Against my better judgment, I decided to check the hallway. Grabbing my phone for light, I cracked the door open and peeked out. The corridor stretched out before me, dimly lit by flickering lights. But something was off. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered. Much longer. I stepped out, looking left and right. The doors on either side of the hall seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. My pulse quickened as I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The air felt colder with each step, and the carpet beneath my feet was damp, as if it had been rained on. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. It echoed strangely, like the sound was being pulled further and further away. No response. Then, I saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway. It was too far to make out any details, but I could tell it wasn't moving. Just standing there, completely still, watching me. I turned to go back to my room, but the door was gone. The walls where it had been were blank, the same peeling wallpaper stretching endlessly in either direction. Panic surged in my chest. I spun back toward the figure. It was closer now. I hadn't heard it move, but it was definitely closer. I backed away, my breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. I tried to run, but my legs felt sluggish, like I was wading through thick mud. The lights overhead flickered more violently, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. And then, just as the figure was almost close enough to touch, the hallway plunged into darkness. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in my bed. The clock read 6:23 a.m. My heart was racing, and my clothes were damp with sweat. I bolted upright, trying to make sense of what had happened. When I checked out later that morning, I asked the clerk about the hallway. His face went pale, and he glanced nervously at the other guests before leaning in. "You were in room 209?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "People say the hallway changes at night. They see things that shouldn't be there. You're lucky you found your way back." I stared at him, speechless. Lucky? I didn't feel lucky. As I walked out to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hallway wasn't done with me. That somewhere, it was still waiting. The scariest thing about motels isn't their creaking beds or flickering lights. It's what happens when the walls hold on to secrets they shouldn't. So next time you find yourself on a lonely road, staring at a neon vacancy sign, ask yourself, what's waiting on the other side of that door? If these stories left you looking over your shoulder, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. And remember, some nights, it's safer to keep driving.